Quote, less than 1/5 of federal revenue is collected by the corporate tax, yet its very existence has been found to lower wages, diminish investment, and slow economic growth, more so than any other tax structure. While other nations have been gradually reducing their rates, the U.S. has failed to act. This quotation from Douglas Holtzkamp, the former director of the Congressional Budget Office, and Gordon Gray, senior advisor at DHE Consulting in April of 2009, represents the reasons why my partner Greg Howe and I, Austin Landgraf, stand resolved that the United States federal government should substantially reform its revenue generation policies. In order to establish context for this round, we offer the following background. Federal corporate tax. A tax imposed by the United States federal government upon the gross income of U.S. or domestically located foreign corporations. The corporate income tax generates roughly 9%, or $180 billion, worth of the United States federal government's total revenue at a tax rate of approximately 35% for larger corporations. That's $180 billion generated at a tax rate of approximately 35%. We would now like to present the focus for this round. The focus or criterion best suited for this purpose is that of economic efficiency. Arguments should be valued according to their impact upon the efficiency of the U.S. economy, and if the affirmative team can prove that by affirming the resolution you can increase the efficiency of the U.S. economy, then you should affirm the resolution and vote affirmative. With the criterion in mind, we will examine the failure of the status quo in the harm. Economy stifling. With the second highest rate in the world at 35%, the U.S. corporate income tax represents the epitome of an economically unfeasible policy. We will be looking at the specific deleterious effects of the high corporate income tax in two subpoints. Subpoint A, wages lowered. Several qualified studies have examined the relationship between the corporate income tax rate and the average wage. For example, Allison Felix, an economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, found that, quote, labor's burden is more than 4 times the magnitude of the corporate tax revenue collected in the U.S., end quotation. Scott Hodge, the president of Tax Foundation, further explained that, quote, according to her model, a 1 percentage point increase in the average corporate tax rate decreases annual gross wages by 0.9%. Translated to U.S. corporate tax collections and wages, this means a $10.4 billion increase in corporate tax collections would lower overall wages by $43.5 billion, end quotation. Now that was probably a bit confusing, but the most important sentence was the last sentence in the quotation. And that was the one where it said that for every $10 billion, $10.4 billion brought in by the corporate income tax, wages go down by $43.5 billion. The relationship between corporate tax collections and wages is 1 to 4. Subpoint B, investment discouraged. Investment discouraged. Scott A. Hodge, the president of Tax Foundation, stated in May of 2011 that, quote, studies show that the corporate income tax hinders entrepreneurship, risk, and investment. Indeed, a study by Jens Arnold and Shirley Shulmus supports the notion that, quote, higher corporate taxes increase the user cost of capital, which leads to less investment and lower productivity. The consequences of this are quite significant, end quotation. To further illustrate the negative impacts of the corporate income tax on investment specifically, Michael J. Boskins, a senior fellow at the Hoover Institute and professor of economics at Stanford University, stated in September of 2010 that, quote, of course, various credits and deductions reduce the effective corporate tax rate, but on some, the corporate tax still severely retards and misaligns investment, problems that will only get worse as more and more capital becomes internationally mobile, end quotation. And the interesting thing about that quotation from Michael J. Boskins was the fact that he said, despite the fact that the effective rate is lower than the statutory rate, on some, our corporate tax still severely retards and misaligns investment in the United States. In order to address this problem, we offer the following plan. Mandate, 20.8%. 20.8%. The United States federal government will reduce the federal corporate tax rate to 20.8% for all corporations except those that generate less than $50,000 per year. This bracket will be taxed at its current rate of 50%. Underneath the resolution, there will be 2 tax brackets for the corporate income tax. One of 15% for corporations that generate less than $50,000 per year, and one of 20.8% of corporations that generate more than $50,000 per year. Mandate observation. State plus federal equals 25%. State plus federal equals 25%. The current average corporate state income tax is 4.2%. Thus, corporations will be paying a combined state plus federal rate of 4.2% plus 20.8%, which comes out to 25%. Thus, corporations will have a 25% corporate income tax burden because we're taking into account both the state rates and the federal rates. Timeline: our plan will be implemented on the start of the next fiscal year. Agency: the United States federal government. Enforcement: the Internal Revenue Service. And funding: our plan will be funded through normal means. By passing the affirmative team's plan, we will achieve the following advantage: economic efficiency. The benefits of achieving efficiency with the corporate tax are outlined by Karen Campbell, PhD, and John Liggett, policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation, in December of 2010. Quote, the Center for Data Analysis of a reduction in the corporate income tax rate to 25% shows impressive growth for the U.S. economy. For example, the number of jobs in the U.S. would grow on average by 581,000 annually from 2011 to 2020, with 531,000 on average being created in the private sector each year. U.S. real gross domestic product would rise on average by $132 billion per year. A typical family of four's after-tax income would rise on average by $2,484 per year. U.S. capital stock would grow by an average of $240 billion more per year, and gross private domestic investment would increase by $57.2 billion per year, in quotation. We will highlight two additional economic benefits of cutting the corporate income tax in two subpoints. Subpoint A, 11.1% GDP growth. 11.1% GDP growth. William McBride, an economist at the Tax Foundation, who holds a PhD in economics from George Mason University, stated in February of 2012 that, quote, corporate income taxes have a highly significant and negative effect on long-term growth. The estimates suggest that cutting the corporate rate by 10 percentage points is associated with an increase in total real GDP growth of 11.1 percentage points over the period. This would move the U.S. from below average to above average in terms of economic growth among OECD countries, in quotation. The article goes on to say, to specify that 11.1 percentage points of GDP growth is actually over a period of 10 years. So 11.1 percentage points of GDP growth over a period of 10 years. Subpoint B, inward investment encouraged. Subpoint B, inward investment encouraged. Roya Wolverson, a staff writer on economics and former staff reporter on finance and investing for the Wall Street Journal, stated in February of 2011 that, quote, a 2008 Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development study found that, quote, foreign direct investment increases by 3.7% for every 1 percentage point decrease in the corporate tax rate, end quotation. So in essence, the OECD study found that for every 1 percentage point decrease in the country's corporate tax rate, foreign direct investment increases in that country by 3.7 percentage points. Underneath the criterion of economic efficiency, I urge you to leave behind the status quo, which cripples efficiency in the U.S., and affirm the resolution. Thank you.
Allison, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you, Roman?
I'm doing great. Just a couple questions about your speech. First off, could I please have a copy of it?
Yes, here you are.
All right, thank you so much. So first off, just a couple background questions about the corporate tax.
Yeah.
Now, how much does it generate per year?
$180 billion.
Okay, did you have a source for that in your first speech?
Actually, no, that was underneath our background point, but that was actually our own wordage. We can definitely supply support at
All right.
source, yes.
All right, so how long would it take to recover this lost revenue?
Actually, what we see is that we're not going to lose that much revenue. We're going to lose about $30 billion. Actually, I can check, maybe $40 billion. I'm going to check that with my partner, but it's actually not going to be a significant loss of revenue whatsoever.
Okay, so 40 billion, that's around a third of 130 billion, right?
Yeah, sure.
All right, so we lose about a third of the corporate tax revenue in the first year, you said?
No, the corporate tax revenue is $180 billion.
Oh, sorry, 180, sorry.
Yes.
I thought I said 130. Never mind, my partner can move my table. Anyways, so moving on, let's talk about the effective corporate tax rate.
Yes.
How much is the effective corporate tax rate? What they actually end up paying?
The effective corporate tax rate right now is 34.6%.
Okay. Did you bring up numbers for that in your speech?
No, we do not, but we can definitely do that.
All right. So, isn't there an exemption for corporations for taxes paid to state and local governments?
No, actually no. Corporations have to pay corporate taxes to state and local governments.
Okay, but isn't there an exemption to the federal government for taxes they pay to state and local governments?
I don't believe so, no. Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, so wouldn't that mean then that the rate would be around 40%?
Yes, yep, that's actually correct. But statutory rate is 35%, but when you take into account state rates, it's around 39.2%. So
did you just say it was 34% though?
No, the effective rate? The effective rate is 34.6%.
Okay, so what is the ideal rate?
The ideal rate is around 25% because that's when we sacrifice the least revenue but see the most economic gain.
Okay, why is that?
I'm not exactly sure, but what we have seen is that historically, the rate of 25% is what actually releases the least amount of revenue while producing the most economic gain.
Okay, did you bring up any of this history in your speech?
We definitely can.
Okay, but did you bring up any in your first speech?
No.
Okay, so you have to take each state rate into account along with the 20.8%, correct?
Yes. Wait,
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so don't some states like Pennsylvania have a 10% corporate tax rate?
No, actually that's not true. What we see that because of credits and deductions, the state rates actually vary between 2% and about 5%.
Okay, so not all states will pay the actual rate though of 25%, right?
No, that's correct.
Okay, so one more question. Under your advantage one of efficiency, you observation of the 25% rate card.
Yes.
Now this part was from the Heritage Foundation, correct?
The 20,000 underneath the advantage, is that correct? Yes, we read one.
The one from Karen Campbell.
Yes, that was the Heritage Foundation, and then 2 further subpoints, one from 2 other sources, which are the ones.
All right, and then on that card from the Heritage Foundation, that was about the federal corporate tax rate, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so it was saying that a federal corporate tax
Actually, no,
rate
it was talking about corporate taxes in general, and that's why we need to take into account both federal and state.
Okay, did you read any part from the evidence? Can I see the article actually to provide that context?
I don't have the article, no.
Okay, so we don't know if the context was
It
federal or
says-
state plus
It
federal?
says corporate taxes.
But it doesn't specify if it's federal or
It's
both.
talking about corporate tax burden, which means both federal and state.
Interesting. No further questions.
Thank you.